Hi, welcome to Bite Me Fanboy, a comics podcast. I'm Kate.
I'm Tom.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Kirsten.
And today we're going to be talking about the Sentry series run from the year 2000, issues 1 through 5. This run was written by Paul Jenkins with art by Jay Lee and Bill Sienkiewicz. Colors are by Jose Villarrubia, letters by Richard Starkings, and Comicraft Wes Abbott. So let's dive in. I'm first going to give a spoiler warning right up top. We're going to be discussing the entirety of the run. So if you have not read this run or the Sentry in general and you want to go ahead and do that before you listen, I would save this for a different time. And then you can come back and join the full discussion where we're going to talk about and spoil everything that goes on in this series. So, Tom, can you talk about the plot of what we just read?
Okay, so the best way I could describe the Sentry is that it opens with this guy named Bob Reynolds, or Robert Reynolds. He wakes up in the middle of the night, and he's this middle-aged guy, kind of schlubby. He kind of reminds me of Mr. Incredible from the beginning of The Incredibles, but I think they're just playing on the same archetype. But he wakes up in the middle of the night and says, "Hey, I just had a memory, and there's something wrong." He opens up this book he has on his shelf, and it looks like he's stowed away some, like a hip flask or something, but it's a bottle of what looks like super serum, and he says, "Listen, there's a supervillain." He says, actually, he specifically looks at a corgi. It says, "We must be vigilant, watchdog, for we're humanity's only hope." But anytime I look at a corgi, I always think we must be vigilant, watchdog. But he drinks the super juice, and you see this history. It's all done very much in the style of an old late 50s, early 60s Kirby comic. Previously to this comic being released, there was a fake obituary written in Wizard magazine for a comic artist who supposedly wrote the Sentry comics. And this is a continuation of an old comic series. He was created for this comic, but they make it look like that. So you see all these memories in this guy, and including... in one of the flashbacks, it's a spoof of The Dark Knight Returns, where they show like the Sentry version of The Dark Knight Returns down to the goofy giant shoulders of like how Frank Miller does Batman. But anyways, Sentry drinks the super juice, and it gives him all his powers, and he remembers. He remembers everything. He remembers he used to be a superhero, and he was friends with the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. He was like Superman, and his wife comes up and says, "Hey, Bob, are you drinking? Because if you're drinking again, I'm going to go to my mom's place. I don't want to have to deal with this." And she leaves, and Bob gets some like clothespins and puts I think it's either like a robe or a towel on a coat. And when no one's looking, he flies off Superman style. He first goes looking for Mr. Fantastic, and he's over at the Baxter Building on a construction crane, and he's just standing there like a guy who looks like he's about to jump. So Mr. Fantastic shows up and is like, "Hi, you look like you're about to do something bad. I want to make sure you're okay." And he's like, "Hey, you remember me, right?" And Mr. Fantastic says, "I have no idea who you are." So Bob says, "Hey, just remember the unicorn." And Mr. Fantastic says, "I have no idea what you're talking about." But by the time he's trying to remember the unicorn, Bob has disappeared. He didn't jump, he just vanished. Normally that's Batman's thing, but Bob's doing a Superman deal. Reed is hanging out with the rest of the Fantastic Four, and he says, "Hey, do y'all know anything about a unicorn?" And Sue is like, I don't know. And they see a little unicorn sitting on their table, and they're like, "Wait a second, what was that? Why was that here?" And they suddenly remember going to Bob's wedding. They remember being there for when Bob got married. The flashback is done, I believe it's specifically in the style of Spider-Man's wedding to Mary Jane. The art style shifts. Every time there's a flashback, it's a different art style, unless it's like plot relevant. If it's just meant to evoke a memory, it changes to a different comic book style. But yeah, Reed remembers being the best man at Bob's wedding. Reed says, "Hey, we've got Bob's wedding video." And he puts the tape in. It's a VHS tape, of course, because this was made in 2000. He puts the VHS tape in, and it's just Reed Richards saying, "Hey, if you're watching this, you have to stop, because if you're seeing this, we're all going to die." Which is just, the best way to start a tape. I think literally every VHS tape should start this way, and that's my personal opinion. Just like, you put in a VHS tape of the Hunt for Red October, and it's just Mr. Fantastic saying we're all going to die. The Sentry goes and finds the Hulk, and the Hulk totally recognizes the Sentry and is like, hey, it's my buddy, which is great. I love that literally the Hulk is so indestructible, his memory is indestructible. Meanwhile, Reed Richards is not having as great of a time because the VHS tape explodes. He doesn't know why. But long story short, he's like, someone didn't want me to watch this tape. The Sentry, or Bob, whose cape, the towel has turned into an actual superhero cape now. Bob is talking to the Hulk and he says, hey, I think my old nemesis is coming back and we need to figure out what to do about it. And you can see across the world there are these disasters happening. You don't see what's causing them, you just see this destruction. Reed finds a bunch of old files and stuff that he had kept stored somewhere, but he doesn't know what they are. He doesn't know what's in them. Bob is hanging out on the rooftops in New York, and this guy, Spider-Man, shows up and he says, hey, Peter, I'm having some trouble right now. Any way you possibly remember me? And Spider-Man says, I don't know who this Peter guy is, but I'll tell him you're looking for him. Also, one of my favorite bits where you have Spider-Man talking, the angle you have them at, it looks like Bob is sitting on the roof. And at a certain point, you realize Bob is actually floating about 5 feet off of the edge, just in midair, Superman style. And he shows Peter Parker a photo, and Peter says it's just a blank piece of paper. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. You're just showing me a blank piece of paper. He's like, no, you should look this up. Like, he gives him an issue of the Daily Bugle, because I want to say at this time in the comics, the Daily Bugle wasn't a newspaper, it was a magazine. And Peter goes to look for it, and then Mr. Fantastic finds a whole series of files that he has on the Sentry, just in time for Doctor Strange to show up and say, hey, if you remember anything, then our universe is going to end. And they're just like, wait, what the heck just happened? Why is this going on? Then Bob goes and looks for other people he knew from back in the day. He shows up at the Xavier School. He's talking to Charles Xavier. He has this weird vision of the Sentry from looking at Bob's memories. And he knows Bob is there, but something crazy happens and he passes out immediately because something crazy is going down when he read Bob's mind. You also see a Avengers group, I believe it's the Avengers in Europe, they get killed because they're Z-list fodder for these disasters we're talking about. Which I'm never a fan of Z-listers getting killed off just to show situations serious. One of the members of that group was like a brain in a jar, and I'm like, I want to know about that brain in a jar. Peter Parker finally starts remembering looking at this magazine, and you see that the cover becomes a picture that he took of Sentry. But people start remembering the Sentry. People start seeing him, and then all of a sudden, Bob is walking through New York, and he sees this tower that wasn't there before, and it's this giant watchtower. It is the Fortress of Solitude. It is Superman's Fortress of Solitude, very clearly. It's run by a computer named Clock. Clock looks like the most sinister thing imaginable. He's a giant red eye of Sauron with tentacles coming off of him, and I know Clock is supposed to be, actually just a normal robot, but I cannot not see, what if Sauron and the Borg merged every time Clock's on screen? I'm going to be honest. I love this book, but, Clock's design always looks creepy.
Really quick, I got a question. When you said Superman Fortress of Solitude, were you joking? Because aren't they, two different comic companies?
Yeah, this is Marvel riffing on a Superman type character. Marvel's doing their own version of a Superman.
Oh, okay, so not actually Superman.
Yeah, he's not actually Superman, but it's he has stuff. That's why he has a dog named Watchdog, who is implied to have also been a superhero at some point. Because that corgi is Crypto, because Superman has Crypto the superdog. But in the original Sentry series, he's a Yorkie, or some other terrier dog. He has long hair and long ears.
And Clock is a good boy.
Clock is a good boy, but Bob is asking Clock, why don't people remember me? And Clock's like, I can't tell you. There's something literally inside of me, a device that stops me from being able to remember anything. And he says, well, who did it? And, Clock says, it was put there by Reed Richards. So Clock's like, oh my God, what happened? Also, all the Avengers have this memory, and they say, oh, wait, we needed to, get the Sentry out of the Avengers and destroy his memory. And so they're saying, Bob was a terrible guy. He was taking drugs. He was working as a supervillain, and he's destroyed the legacy of the Avengers, and he's dead to us, and all this stuff. And there's this funeral for him. And he's like, well, why am I still alive? And all that. Anyway, so Bob goes back to his home, and his wife, because people all over the world start remembering the Sentry, his wife remembers who he was, and she's like, oh God, I'm so sorry, I thought you were like drinking. I'm not going to lie. There is kind of a little bit of a metaphor of this guy who drinks a magic liquid and then thinks he's more powerful than he is. All of a sudden, while this is happening, that nemesis I was talking about, the Void, shows up, and he's this big shadowy version of Bob. You can't completely tell, but like they have the exact same like body shape. He's just not wearing the same clothing, but he has the same head shape and everything, and you see him in silhouette. He grabs Bob's wife and attacks her. And she's like, oh God, I saw evil and all this stuff. It's vagueness is coming and it's dangerous. And you start seeing like all these disasters happen, and there's a giant hurricane coming. And the hurricane itself is like the Void's true form. So they put out a call to show up at Liberty Island in New York. And all the superheroes who Bob has been talking to all show up to help stop the Void. You have everybody hanging out there. And then some other superheroes show up. And then Reed Richards shows up. And he's like, hey, Reed, why'd you tell everybody I was a monster? Why'd you destroy everything? And Reed's like, I don't remember still. I still have no idea what just went down. And all the superheroes sit there and watch as the giant living hurricane that is the Void comes into town. And that's when we skip to the tie-ins. So to make a long story short, each tie-in is a riff on older comics. You have you'll see a character sitting on Liberty Island, and then they flash back, and you have everything jump to, their flashback remembering Sentry. And you have the Thing and Mr. Fantastic are remembering, and it's done in this very, very busy looking, heavily like inked lines everywhere. I would say probably a 90s comic, especially because people's faces are constantly grimacing. If you ever read 90s comics, that's like a big thing. Everybody looks like they're scowling all the time. Reed is now remembering the Sentry, and it's them fighting Watchtower because something has hacked Clock. We go to the next tie-in, and the next tie-in is the Spider-Man one, where it's set up to look like, oddly enough, so they say the Sentry is like actually from around before Spider-Man, but the entire stylistic look of the Spider-Man section is done to look like I would almost say a McFarlane era Spider-Man, which is 80s. Spider-Man would have been around for about 20 years at that point, but it's supposed to be like early Spider-Man, but it's just whenever you look at like Spider-Man iconography, a lot of that visual style, if it's not from Steve Ditko, the visual style is going to be from the McFarlane 80s era. So that's why it looks like that. But Spider-Man meets the Sentry. It turns out the Sentry was like an old school hero who Spider-Man idolizes. And Aunt May likes more than Spider-Man. She tells him that, and it's very funny. She says Spider-Man's a hoodlum, but the Sentry is a good guy because he doesn't wear a mask. What happens is the Void and Kingpin are working together, and we see what would definitely be like an 80s version of the Void, where it's just a shadow wearing a trench coat and a fedora, which is like also very funny to me because that was like in the 80s especially the default I'm in incognito costume. Like, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have worn that outfit every time they wanted to pretend to be humans. I think that's an intentional choice just to reference that era. Anyways, it ends with Peter taking a picture of the Sentry, and when he takes the picture, it's that picture that was the cover of the magazine. The Sentry tie-in that I really like is actually the Hulk one. It has a lot of energy of, like, actually it's pulling from several Hulk runs. There's a lot of Peter David Hulk in there, but so much of the Hulk it's also very much his more expressive stuff. There's a lot of Barry Windsor Smith Hulk in here. Barry Windsor Smith famously wrote a origin for the Hulk, and basically they apparently had talked about it at the office, and it was a very dark origin, but it really does fit the Hulk as a character of like how Bruce Banner was as a child, like what his childhood was like. And another writer who was writing Hulk at the time was like, oh, okay, that's what our origin for the Hulk is going to be, and he wrote it. And everyone's just like, hey, dude, you just stole Barry's idea. I say this because later on, Barry Windsor Smith would publish his version of that story, but it wouldn't be a Hulk story. It would just be its own standalone thing unrelated to Marvel, and it was called, I believe, Barry Windsor Smith's Monsters. And the Hulk tie-in looks a lot like Monsters. Then Sentry meets the X-Men, and it's the original old-school X-Men team back from the 60s. The art style is way more 70s than 60s X-Men, but it's the 60s X-Men team. And the villain is a guy called the General, who's like got a big bushy beard and like wears a green suit and has an evil red monocle. And that is a 60s X-Men villain if I've ever seen one. A weird, goofy guy pretending to be a general with a monocle, that is extremely 60s X-Men. The final tie-in, though, is the Sentry versus the Void. And if you look at the cover, it tells you exactly what's going on with the Sentry and the Void, because the Void is literally just an evil Sentry on the cover with an inverted Sentry symbol. Now, the Sentry symbol is a big S. He's a big hero with a big cape, he's shiny, primary colors, and he's got a big S on his belt instead of his chest. So he is Marvel's version of Superman. And the Void, being his evil opposite, is at one point General Zod, who is like Superman's evil opposite, but also with the evil guy with the S that's reversed to look kind of like a Z, that's very much Bizarro. And so he is the Superman equal and opposite, and we see the Sentry go up against the Void, and they find out about stuff. Also, supervillains start joining in the fight, like Dr. Octopus is there fighting the Void as well. Thor's fighting the Void. Whenever the Void touches you, you start seeing, like, not just bad things that have happened in your past, but also bad things that will happen in your future. When Peter Parker touched the Void in his flashback, he sees all of the bad stuff that's going to happen in his life, which, if you know Peter Parker, that's just like an unending miasma of horror. Eventually, you reach the point where Doctor Strange, Mr. Fantastic, and the Sentry are talking, and they explain what's actually been going on. And this is going to give you the full explanation. Long story short, the Void and the Sentry are the same person. They are two personalities, two sides of Bob Reynolds. As long as Bob can remember his powers, as long as Bob can remember being the Sentry, the Void has a foothold in the world. So, as long as people remember, if someone could remember and remind Bob that he was the Sentry, the Void would come back. And that's the problem. And that's why everyone's saying, oh, don't remember. If you remember, then we're all doomed. The device in there was created by Reed Richards, but it was actually put there by Bob Reynolds in Clock to stop everything from happening. Doctor Strange blew up the VHS tape to try to stop it, and he failed. And a long time ago, the Void got loose and caused a bunch of destruction, and the Fantastic Four and the Avengers all got together and said, hey, Bob, what do we do? And they made a decision with Bob. They made a plan where they would remove Bob's positive associations with people. So they destroyed the reputation of the Sentry. They faked his death, told everybody the Sentry was a bad guy. He had to go away. Then they put the little machine in there. So that way there was no positive association, no big nostalgia for him. And it made everybody in the world forget that the Sentry existed. And that's why he's never shown up in any Marvel comics previous to this one. No joke, that's the reason, that machine. Bob also had a sidekick. By the way, he also had a sidekick. He had his own, like, I was going to say, for the lack of a better word, it wasn't even a Superboy. It was a Robin, almost.
Jason Todd
and
Robin.
He remembers Bob, and they get to say each other. But at the end of the day, they have to eradicate people's memory of the Sentry again to stop it. Everyone does. Bob and his wife go to a burger shop. They see the guy who was Bob's old sidekick, and there's this moment of recognition that Bob has with him. And he does smile, which could be, nice and hopeful, but at the same time, that also means as long as Bob has that memory, the Void could come back. So you end with this kind of uncomfortable double-edged sword of, well, yeah, it's nice that this guy has a little bit of recognition for someone who was part of his life and a loved one, but also, is that also a bad sign? And that's literally how the comic ends. It's kind of abrupt, but I love that ambiguity. And that's, to make a long story slightly less long, that's the Sentry.
I have a question about the ending.
Yeah.
Isn't the ending, like, maybe I misread it or misremembered, but isn't the ending basically like how we started? And so like by erasing everybody's, like, everything from Bob, like the memories of Bob's memories, like all of the things, isn't that just going to, like, him discovering who he is and, like, having like, it's just going to happen again? Or is the whole, like, cyclical nature of it the point?
I think that is the point. It is meant to be, like, I think the fact that it looks like it could be a cycle or it could be the end is the point, because it's a question about whether or not he would... It's about a question about whether or not someone's going to relapse. Because, yes, he had this wonderful part of his life that he loved doing with other people. He loved having these relationships. He loved having all these parts of his life. but that part of his life was ultimately a destructive force. And the question is he going to be able to leave it behind this time, or will the world be at risk again because he relapsed and the void came back? And I think that's very much the point. We actually, Jordan and I were talking with Paul Jenkins at a Free Comic Book Day thing, and he very much said that he based a lot of this stuff on mental health struggles that he and his family, or specifically his family, had. And so I think that the ambiguity of whether or not Bob will relapse is very much a thing that he was basing on about his family. While I don't have an addiction problem like Bob does, because it's very clearly an addiction metaphor, or at least to me it was.
I want to talk about that a little later.
Oh yeah, no, you're the person who's an actual expert on this sort of thing. But like, I identify a lot with having these mental health struggles where you're like, okay, is this going to come back? And also, one of the ways it manifests with me is sometimes I forget everything. I will be like, I have no memory of something happening. I have no memory. And like, it's very clearly something happened, but I'm panicking because I don't remember if, I did this extremely necessary thing. Just like, imagine if, people had talk about like, what if you left the oven on or something like that and being worried about that. Imagine that, but for like, I don't remember if I left my friend's cat in their apartment when I went over to cat sit for them. I don't remember if the doors closed. And like, then you have this panicky moment. And of course, I literally just, my mind blanks out. And like, that whole thing where at the very beginning where Bob is just waking up in the middle of the night, like, the void's coming back. I don't know what that means. I'm terrified of this. That is literally the thing that made me fall in love with the Sentry. So much so. That is the moment that made me fall in love with that book, because I'm just like, oh, I know that exact feeling he has.
I think that this would be maybe a good time to segue into like, what does the void represent to Bob? Because you said that it reminded you of addiction. I got like sort of a depression kind of metaphor, or even like dissociative identity disorder. Like I got like kind of several things, but I could also see like addiction.
Oh yeah, he straight up dropped he dropped dissociative identity disorder when we talked to him.
Oh, okay.
So you're definitely right about that. And without getting into too much of my life, the depression is the mental illness I deal with, depression and anxiety. So you're definitely on the ball when talking about depression, because I identified with that sort of thing.
I think that it's like a really interesting look at how like someone portrays that mental health issue. And especially like, I know we're not talking about like, oh, the 50s or 40s or whatever, but even still like in the 2000s, I think mental health had a huge stigma attached to it. And so I think it was quite interesting and maybe even brave to like bring that, even as like a metaphor, bring that to like the forefront of a comic book story.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and this is the Marvel Knights era. It's when Marvel was so hard up for cash, they approached comics creators and just said, hey, do you want to just do a comic with this character and you can just do whatever you want? And that is literally what they did. And Jenkins did that with the Inhumans, and is the only reason people care about the Inhumans nowadays. Like that original miniseries, like every time the Inhumans come back, it's because of the Paul Jenkins miniseries. And the Sentry was what he did after that. It was when he's like, okay, I already did the big thing for Marvel and they want me to come back, and they're basically saying, hey, literally do whatever you want. That's where the Sentry comes in.
I think one of the smart things that he did with this run was making it so broad as to, it could be various things. So there is the calls to addiction, there's calls to various mental illnesses. So I got a lot of manic depressive vibes, because you have the Sentry, who is he's the bright person, the always happy, always smiling, seeing all of his friends able to do everything. And then you have the Void, who is the opposite of that. So it's the depressive side. And by leaving it open and not saying that, I also noticed the Comics Code stamp was on all of the issues. So it was able to get past the screeners too by not having anything super specific.
Oh, that's a really interesting point.
That is a really good point. I forgot. I'm looking at my book right now. I'm looking at where's the Comics Code on this thing?
Top right corner.
So in the edition I have, the physical edition I have does not have the Comics Code Authority sticker on there. So I just looked up the cover online and I'm like, oh my God, you're right. That's on there. Because the Comics Code wouldn't let anybody or doesn't want people to get too real about anything. So yeah, you're entirely right about that.
That's fascinating. And I'm also like, as I'm sitting here kind of like with our conversation, I'm also thinking about how maybe it could also be kind of like a metaphor for trauma, and like how some trauma survivors, they forget their past, or they forget, like, they kind of like their brain protects them, right? And so like they section off like a part of what they went through, and they don't have any memories of it because they're not ready, or they can't face what they went through in the past. And so it kind of reminded me of Bob kind of like sectioning off and like forgetting the void part of himself and the Sentry as like a form of trauma and a form of like dealing with that trauma.
Mm-hmm. And then when you finally start feeling safe and have flashbacks and the panic waking up in the middle of the night.
Right.
No, that's yeah, you're entirely right.
Yeah, I really like the fact that this is like a lot of people can get a lot of different things from this particular character and story. Kirsten, what did you think?
I'm still like marveling in the fact that what Tom said, where the reason why you don't see the Sentry in any other comics is because everybody forgets about him. And that did not hit me until Tom said it. So
the Sentry, there was a period of time where the Sentry was kind of overused in the comics, and so a lot of people kind of don't have a huge amount of nostalgia for him as a character. But I absolutely adore the Sentry because my first interaction with the Sentry was this story. It wasn't when he was like in all the Avengers stuff under the Bendis run. And so like my whole thing is literally about a guy who's forgotten by the world. All the implications, I love this. I love this book.
Do you think that the everybody forgetting the Sentry and the Void and like his whole character, do you think this is like a commentary on how comics retcon things and like have different continuity?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's certain things where you watch a piece of media and the piece of media uses a tool that's specific to itself to illustrate a plot device. Like, if you've ever seen a movie where someone goes back in time and the way they depict it is by rewinding the scene, like you're watching the scene play on a movie screen in reverse. And this was much more of a thing back in the VHS era, but like when you rewound a movie to go back to the beginning, it literally just looked like you were rewinding the tape. And so a lot of these movies would, as a joke, like make the movie look like you were rewinding a tape. And in the Sentry, they're depicting these retcons as people suddenly remembering things and people realizing things. And so I think they're using retcons as a tool of storytelling rather than a way to retroactively insert a story where there wasn't before, which I find very interesting.
I also think that I guess it depends on like what the Void would be like specifically a metaphor for, I guess, according to Paul Jenkins, because I think that the answer would be different depending on like what you get from the story. But my question is like, do you think that the way Bob deals with the Void is effective or healthy, or like, what do you think about that?
I don't think I think it is a solution that by the end is very much kind of like, do you think this is going to exist, or is this a temporary solution? They're like trying to ask you that. And I think that's part of the ending. But I know Jenkins originally intended to write a trilogy of Sentry stories, and Marvel only let him write the first two. And so I think this was never intended to be the sum total of the Sentry dealing with the Void. I think this was meant to be how it starts, and it would take longer and be a larger process. And that's the issue we kind of have with the fact that there's no third storyline, because it had, like, in the second storyline, without spoiling too much, he's literally going to therapy and talking to a therapist about the Void and talking to him about his mental health and trying to literally go get therapy to help deal with his situation. And I think that's a major step. That's actually a major step for real life. And I don't think this is a solid ending when we need, like, the Sentry needs to have more work done to deal with the Void. I don't think it's a permanent solution. I just think it's a The end of this book is saying it's probably just temporary.
Who was the character interaction that you liked the best? Though, like, when Sentry came back to, like, say, like, do you remember me?
Hulk.
There's a great piece of lore about the Hulk that I will always love. I will say I always love it. It's really horrible for the Hulk. It is a tragic and messed up thing. But being the Hulk is painful. And I think that is such an interesting story beat and character beat that explains a lot about this character and his anger and everything. So I really like that. And this comic, I'll be honest, this was the first comic I read that had that as a plot point. It's not original to this comic. It's in many things. I believe it's in the Peter David run. That's like the thing that really defines Hulk as a solid character. But this was the first thing. And then the Sentry meets the Hulk. And this is the literal golden boy meets the Hulk, who is this rage monster, and sees a kindred spirit of a guy who's clearly got mental health issues. And canonically, Bruce Banner has DID. Canonically, Bruce Banner has dissociative identity disorder, and he has several alters. What we know as, like, the Hulk in this is just one of them.
Interesting.
So, like, he uses his powers to, like, make a little ball of light that makes the Hulk not hurt. And it's just such a sweet story, and it's this one little issue, and it's not even, like, a big dramatic story. It's just a little expressionistic story about two guys who clearly both are dealing with some sort of mental struggle, meeting each other and making each other feel better. And, like, what more can you ask for?
Yeah. If you were like Bob and you had a void attached to you, would you want to, like, forget it, or would you want to, like, forget your life as, like, a superhero? Because, like, with Sentry comes the void, right? Like, you can't split them. So, like, what would your solution be?
How dark do you want to go, Kate?
Oh, as dark as you want.
Because I'm going, really the only solution if you're a hero is to off yourself.
Oh my God.
Because
that's
if you're
not the only solution. Go to therapy, Jordan.
It's not a solution because he's a comic book character. Dying doesn't stop him. They'll come back. Comic book characters constantly come back from the dead.
If you were real life, if this was happening to you in real life,
lean into it.
Oh, okay.
Jordan is very close to becoming a supervillain. You gotta understand.
Okay, people
on
don't
any
do it
given day.
I'm not interested in hurting people, but people don't do things properly, and I can fix it.
Again, like, listen, if Jordan was in a lab accident that scarred her face, she would be walking around in a metal mask and a cape and addressing everybody as Jordan Von Doom. I'm just saying.
I feel like she's more Valentina.
Okay, yeah, no, she does have big Val energy. Complimentary, Jordan.
Yes, no, this is a good thing.
My honest so here's the thing. I can say what I want to be my answer, but I also know that this answer is so difficult. It's way easier said than done. But honestly, if I had something like the Void, I kind of want to understand it.
Yeah.
I know academically the correct, like, not correct, but, like, the thing that would probably be my best chance would be try to understand it and communicate with the Void and try to, like, make some sort of peace with it and find out why it's so aggressive and causes so much destruction, because, like, the Void's intelligent, and that's a big thing in this. The Void's existence isn't the storm. The Void is causing the storm because it wants to. And on one hand, that's kind of this weirdly idealistic, we can just Steven Universe talk it out with the villain. But also, there's a part of me that's me, and there's a part of me that's the Void, then it's not a wholly evil and antagonistic entity. It's just part of me. And that's something that, if it's part of me, it's something that you can work with, you know? It'd be a shame if Marvel retconned the Void as being a cosmic entity that was actually unrelated to Bob Reynolds and wholly evil, and not just a part of himself that he has to deal with. That would be a terrible idea, Marvel. Don't do it. Well, never mind. Yes, that's literally what they did. They made the Void an evil cosmic entity and unrelated to Bob.
Oh,
and
I see.
I hate that. I hate that so much.
So, Jordan, you would just lean into it?
I would know I couldn't talk myself down.
Oh.
If it's the
Jordan knows how stubborn Jordan is.
If it's the bad part of me, and I have a good part of me, the only option again would be to get rid of both parts, because Tom could reason with himself. I would either the dark part would take over, or I'd have to get rid of both.
So
This is what she means by saying go to therapy.
Let me lay this out for you in other words. So you would rather die than just calm yourself down.
Okay, it's not a rather. We're arguing that this is a part.
Call her out, why don't you?
Well, you keep saying there's, two options. And I'm like, I feel like there's a little more than two.
For you and Tom, yes. For me, if it's me split.
Jordan, I say this as your friend. I definitely believe you have the same capacity for good that I do.
Aww.
But
we have not gotten to the end of our
I mean, if I forget about him and everybody forgets about me, is the forgetfulness peaceful? Is it a better condition to be in than, the void situation?
It didn't seem like it from the beginning. It seems like it was causing panic attacks and other addictions.
Yeah, that's the thing. He clearly doesn't have a handle on things. Otherwise, his wife would not have reacted the way she did when she thought he was drinking, and he also wouldn't be panicking in the middle of the night. There's clearly something that Bob needs to be doing. He's got to do something.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. Freshly traumatized Kirsten was mean and, very rude. She would scare me. So, I think I'm just letting the void take her.
Okay, but by what you're saying, though, you're like Tom and Kate. You grew.
Jordan, so have you.
I just feel like this really describes our personalities. Because Tom wants to reason with it and, try and figure it out and, maybe become a friend. Jordan wants to lean into the void or the dark side of herself or kill herself. Kirsten, she wants to try and figure it out and, maybe let it take over. And I would just study it.
I want to clarify something. I'm not going to try to reason with the void. I don't want people to think I'm that kind of person who can do that. I cannot logic myself out of a situation I didn't logic myself into. But in that case, I would try to emotion my way out of something I emotioned myself.
So you're changing your answer to go to therapy.
Yeah, basically. I would want to get in a dialogue with the void and then work my way up to taking the void to therapy.
See, my worry with the dialogue is the void me would convince the good me that, hey, you're on the wrong side.
You know what? I believe that.
Jordan, I've seen how you talk about your dogs. You are not nearly as cruel as you think you are.
Okay, dogs are better than people, though.
I don't think it's cruelty. I think that, the void would just, use logic and, try and, pull on all the right heartstrings and everything. Jordan can be very convincing and stubborn.
So you're saying the void is like Jordan Peterson or something?
No, gross.
So you would say that I shouldn't be a hurricane destroying Liberty Island, but what do you mean by should? And what do you mean by hurricane?
No, our Jordan would use better arguments, especially against herself.
Yeah, pedantic discussions of specific words is just pathetic.
Well, then your void has something up on a significant portion of the internet.
So it's more of does humanity really deserve to be saved?
Yeah.
Damn, that's a good question.
And I mean, if humans aren't here, then nature and animals can recover.
Okay, hold on a second. We got a lot of animals on this planet that ain't going to survive if humans ain't around because they have been domesticated. Also, let's be honest, there's a whole lot of people whose autonomy and personhood I would not be allowing people's self-determination if I wiped out the planet void style.
Well, depending on your views,
and that's something I don't abide.
Depending on your views of the afterlife and how the void kills, it's quick. It can be painless, and then
not in the comic. In the comic, it is not painless. It is extremely painful.
Well, it seems like that was his choice.
Movie, it's
so I'm saying if we're talking about my void, it'd be quick and painless.
Do you get a choice in how your void goes to people? Because I feel like that's just you get what you get.
Right. And so I'm saying dark side, but it's you. So it's dark side of you, light side of you. Dark side of me is not sadistic. It just doesn't care. So it's you're not worth being here. Goodbye.
Are you Thanos? Are you going to snap everyone?
No, because that's chaos. That's chaotic, though. That's a flip of the coin.
You are sounding like Thanos, Jordan.
Well, I mean, have you seen Rio?
It's a complicated thing, because if the void is something external that becomes a disease, like an addiction, which I mean, addiction is a disease. It is like by its virtue of being a disease, internal. If the world didn't have alcohol, there would still be an addictive personality, but also an alcoholic would not have the same temptation. Their disease would express different. So that is kind of extrinsic. But if the void is much more of a specific internal metaphor of stuff that is a part of you, then it's not necessarily even a dark side of you. It is a part of you that is not what you see as your positive side. I would say that because so many people define what's good and what's bad about themselves differently than like how other people do, like we're doing right now. Like how, Jordan is describing herself as a supervillain, and I'll make a joke about Jordan being Doctor Doom, but like, no, when it comes down to it, I don't think Jordan's a supervillain, and I don't think like the darkest self that she is pushing down right now, that does not necessarily have to be an inherently evil thing. It is just a thing that you are masking from the world. And I'm slowly starting to sound like a character from a Persona game. I do not think that in a real life, if the void is a part of a person, then the void is not inherently evil. It is expressing itself evil. And I think that's a major difference.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just think we're getting very philosophical.
Yes.
Well, it's art and comics. Comics are not just for children. They're to make you think. It's just a different medium. Like, I would not give this to a young child. I'd probably give it to a teenager.
Oh, God, no. I would never give this to a kid. Especially just because, like, if I was a kid, I would be really sad by the end because Bob's not the superhero anymore.
Oh, I would, as a very sensitive kid, I'd be like, oh my God, what happens if everybody forgets me?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think this would be for a very young child.
I want to say I read this as a teenager, like maybe 11 or 12, I want to say.
I feel like this would be great for a teenager, especially like one going through like lots of angst and like was angry at the world.
Yes, and that's why I think I read it at exactly the right age for this to really resonate. And that's why I love the Sentry so much. It's extremely... It is an introspective book, but like the fact that this comic is sparking this conversation with us, I think is a testament to how affecting the story. And there's some really good pieces of media stories where like I just, after reading it, I sit down and just think about it for a while. And like it's something that sits in my head.
Yeah, I think it's a very affecting piece of art. And like you mentioned, I think that great works of art make you think uncomfortable things and like maybe make you feel a bit uncomfortable at times and make you sad or happy. And like I felt a whole gamut of emotions while reading this. But yeah, I thought it was very good. And like I felt like it was a very different superhero story than I was expecting and that, I've read previously. And so I really liked it.
It was cathartic. That's the right word for it. When I read it, it was cathartic to read as like a 13-year-old.
Yeah, I can see that. Does anybody have any hot takes or controversial opinions?
My only hot take, and it's the coldest take actually, imagine, is let Paul Jenkins write his third Sentry story, Marvel. Let him finish the trilogy. I desperately want to know what he thinks he wants to bring to the story next. Because I want to know where he's going to take the story, because it's just maybe it's just because I want to find a happy ending for Bob, because like of the catharsis of reading this. Happy ending for Bob means like possibility of happy ending for me, or possibility of happy ending for Bob means a possibility of a happy ending for me. But yeah, it's it's the coldest take imagine, because saying I want another Paul Jenkins comic is like, I want another Paul Jenkins comic. Also, people go to McDonald's and want hamburger.
I don't know if this is a hot take, but I was really mad when he kicked his dog.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was like, I don't know if I can get behind this guy. Like, he's supposed to be the hero, and he kicks.
Yeah, I was almost like, fuck this guy. I don't know what crap you guys are making me read.
Yeah, no, that is, yeah, I think you're right about that. That's because that's where you're going with this guy having a bad side that's being suppressed, and it acts out, and he acts out, and he's a dick to his dog, and you can, rather than like show an extended thing about him being an alcoholic, he kicks his dog, and then his wife asks if he's been drinking, and you're just like, oh, okay, this extremely says like where his state is currently, what he's like right now, what his life is like. Because on one hand, you do see him having a loving relationship with his wife for the most part, but also there is that fear of him going back to being that way, and yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like that. And that was like one of the first bits too. I was like, oh, you're gonna have to work real hard to like win me over.
Did he?
I don't know if it was like I wouldn't want to be friends with this guy probably, but like,
yeah, no, I understand that, yeah.
But I enjoyed the story. Like, I thought it was a compelling, interesting story.
Yeah, Bob is extremely compelling. That's the best way I could describe it. I don't know if I would ever be friends with this man, but I find him so compelling as a character.
Yeah.
So because of that one scene, and I will say this because also for me, I found the Sentry and the Thunderbolts more sympathetic, but that could also be I identified with Yelena going, oh, this poor child, let's take care of him.
Do we have any opinions about the best outfits or costumes, or what do we think of Sentry's outfit?
So I have two things. For Sentry's outfit, one of the things that stood out to me was the S that he has, both on like the belt and then hooking his cape to the costume. They're very, very sharp lines, which you in design, you typically reserve sharp lines for villains. You want softer lines for your main characters, for people you're supposed to be sympathetic towards. And most of his costume doesn't have anything that's going to like stick out as a very sharp line except for those symbols. So like if you look at the Superman S, it's very curvy. It's not like jagged. So like, and one exception, it reminds me kind of like a lightning symbol, but he doesn't have lightning powers. So that's another in comic books that I've noticed. But also,
his entire aesthetic is sunlight and fire.
Mm-hmm.
It's not lightning. So they're like, no, this is not a lightning power he has. This is something else.
Mm-hmm. And then I always love Doctor Strange's outfit.
The lines are something I don't think I noticed. That's really interesting.
I'm going to say this very honestly. My favorite outfit, I know the Sentry look is great. I love how the Sentry looks. I love that aesthetic. But man, the General in the X-Men tie-in, he has a red cyborg monocle. He is dressed in like green general fatigues with a giant belt with a big G on it. I'm just like, man, I love how silly some old comic book designs can be. And that is clearly a send up to that sort of thing. Like, he looks like Count Nefaria. I love old school, silly looking supervillains. The thing is that you have to do character design and thought behind it, but at the same time, you're not trying to be taken seriously. And it's something I love. That said, there is the picture of Bob that Peter Parker took that was the cover of the magazine. I love that picture because it is everything the Sentry wants to be.
Yeah.
It is the Sentry as the aspirational figure, as the, the hero. And also, it is entirely possible that's a photo of Paul Jenkins in a costume. Looking at it right now, I'm like, wait a second. Is that Paul Jenkins? Because it looks like someone took a photo of Paul Jenkins. That's how he looks. Paul Jenkins, like I love seeing that version of the Sentry because, like Superman, it's supposed to evoke hope.
Yeah.
And you have this idea of this is the guy who Bob wishes he could be all the time. And it's really easy to see why he would be so invested in being able to come back to them.
Yeah.
And I think there is a literal Paul Jenkins insert in the second run.
Yes. In the second run, the Sentry comics exist in universe because somehow... So the Sentry's powers are more like more cosmic in the main Marvel universe. Long story short, like... His adventures were being beamed into the memories of Paul Jenkins, or the dreams of Paul Jenkins, and he wrote the comic. And that's like a plot point in the Bendis run of the Avengers, where the Sentry does finally show up. Like Bob is part of Bob's adventures are part of Paul Jenkins' mind and like being beamed in there. So he's written Sentry comics, and that is a plot point. Also, straight up in the second Sentry storyline, when like Bob gets an idea of what the nature of the Void and everything, he's like, "Hey, who knows about this?" And the Void looks at him and says, "Basically, just you, me, and this one comic book writer." And he says where Paul Jenkins was living at the time. He's like, "Yeah, it's the us three." I literally showed that panel to Paul Jenkins, and he's like, "Oh my god, I forgot I wrote that."
All right, and what do we think that this is or was setting up for Sentry? Like, did we think that this was going to be his own kind of like storyline, or did we think that this was going to be like moved into movies or TV shows, or was this just like a comic book thing? What was the point of this run?
This was, I think, supposed to be a miniseries. It was meant to be just a self-contained miniseries, but I think that ambiguous note, because like he planned a trilogy, I think that ambiguous note was meant to leave it open so other opportunities for the Sentry to come back would be available.
So why do you think that the Thunderbolts chose Sentry to be in there?
The cynic in me says because he was one of the comic book characters they had available from Marvel to adapt. But the idealist in me is someone said, "Hey, I want to do a character-focused story. What's something I can do in a self-contained movie that's character-focused?" And someone said, "We'll go with one of the superheroes who's had like a very prominent character-focused story." And like the Bob of the movie is a very different character, but it got started somewhere. Like they definitely were pulling from something when they did when they did the movie, pulling from this book.
Do you think that it was like a good adaptation, or because I don't think it was like a faithful adaptation of the character, but like it was a good adaptation?
I think it is a spiritually good adaptation. Part of the point of the Sentry of the book is a middle-aged man who is in conflict with his past self. The Sentry of the film is a much younger man trying to reckon with his mental state in his present time. And I think the two of them are not mutually exclusive. It's just the idea of the same character at different points in his life. And it doesn't, you don't get into a lot of Bob's background in this book, but the Bob of the movie with the burnout backstory and everything, that is straight up from the second Sentry series that Jenkins did. You see more of like his backstory and his life and who he was, and you do see like, oh yeah, no, he was like, the Bob of the movie is very much pulling from that storyline. Especially specifically being a burned out addict before he got superpowers. And the superpowers exacerbating his mania and depression.
All right. Does anybody else have any last thoughts before we go?
Well, my absolute least favorite outfit is the one he had in the movie.
Which one?
The gold
the one that was
with
like
the blonde hair and...
See, my least favorite one was the hospital gown or whatever that exposed his ripped stomach.
I understand why. I just find it funny. I find that outfit so funny.
Very strategic of them.
Besides the hole in the stomach, I kind of like that because those are just hospital scrubs. Like the little paper scrubs they give psych patients, and so it's kind of telling that he had psych issues and he's in a psych gown.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was looking at it from the comedic point of view, like, oh, look, now we get to see his shredded stomach. But yeah, no, I think the movie Sentry costume was not great. It reminded me of something from The Boys.
Yeah.
I think that's what they were going for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that was intentional.
Yeah.
I really, like, they were giving him, like, that, kind of a garish outfit.
Because when you watch through to the, like, after scenes, and he's back just as a normal person. So he clearly wasn't thrilled with it either. And yeah.
Did he put his hair back? I forgot to notice.
I think he was a brunette at the end.
Okay, good.
Yeah, his hair is back to normal.
He was like,
I guarantee you his hair was back to normal because that scene was filmed separately. That scene was filmed around the time they were doing the Fantastic Four film or one of the Avengers films. So like his hair had time to go back to normal.
I like to imagine all of them like together in a bathroom helping him like rinse the bleach out of his hair. That was a good movie. All right, are we done? Can I wrap us up? All right. Thank you for joining us on Bite Me Fanboy, a comics podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow comic fans. We will see you next time. Bye.